Welcome to Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where three cartoonists take an in-depth look at the greatest comic strip of all time, Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is Unpacking Peanuts, but it's a best of guests episodes. Remember when you'd settle down and it may be May and you'd be ready for the brand new episode of Family Ties and someone went into the attic and pulled out a photo album and you knew you were getting the flashback show? Well, get ready to flashback.
We're all stuck in the elevator reminiscing.
Right.
Or the basement, depending on the episode, right?
Depending on the episode. I'll be your host for the flashback. My name is Jimmy Gownley. I'm also a cartoonist. I did Amelia Rule, 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up, and The Dumbest Idea Ever. Joining me, as always, are my pals, co-hosts, and fellow cartoonists. He's a playwright and a composer, both for the band Complicated People, as well as for this very podcast. He's the co-creator of the original Comic Book Price Guide, the original editor of Amelia Rules, and the cartoonist behind such great strips as Strange Attractors, A Gathering of Spells, and Tangled River. It's Michael Kohn.
Say hey.
And he's the executive producer and writer of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a former vice president of Archie Comics, and the creator of the Instagram sensation Sweetest Beasts. It's Harold Buchholz.
Hello.
So, guys, in order to give ourselves a little break, we are going to go back into the old Peanuts Time Machine and revisit some of the guests that we got to speak with. I'm speaking for myself. It's been such a thrill and an unexpected delight to be able to get so many guests and to talk with them on this show. What do you guys think about all the great people we got to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people I've never met and always wanted to meet. Yeah, some people have given a lot of thought to Peanuts and have been heavily influenced by it. So really interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Harold?
Yeah, what Michael said.
Exactly. So that is what we're going to do. Basically, you know the drill. We often, when we would get a guest in here, we would have them, pick their top 5 strips or 5 strips that mean something to them. So a lot of our discussions will be focused around the strips they chose. Otherwise, it's just some stuff that I pulled out that I thought was interesting and deserved highlighting. So with thanks to all of our guests who have shown up and provided such great insight into this comic strip, I present to you our best of guests episode. Liz, fire up the time machine.
It's time for the Peanuts Time Machine.
We were so lucky to have as our first guest Alexis Fajardo. Alexis is not only a great cartoonist, but he's the editorial director at the Charles M. Schulz studio out there in good old Santa Rosa, California. So it meant a lot to me personally to have Lex on the show, not only because he's a great guy and affiliated with the Schulz studios, but because he's also a great cartoonist. He has been doing the strip Kid Beowulf for years and years, and it just keeps getting better. So give his work a check out if you haven't already. And in the meantime, let's listen to what he had to say to us. Tell us a little bit about your work with the Schulz people. That's just an amazing thing. I got to go out there once several years back, and it's just a magical place. And for cartoonists like you who loves it, and it's in your bones and in your blood, it must be a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, no. And I remember your visit. You came as a cartoonist in residence, and it was fun just to show you around the campus. And so I've been at the Schulz studio. This is my 15th year. I was hired back in January of 2007. And I distinctly remember, my first day on campus. I mean, we call it Snoopy Central because there is a Schulz Museum. And then across the way from the Schulz Museum is the Redwood Empire Ice Arena, also called Snoopy's Home Ice, which is the beautiful ice rink and the Warm Puppy Cafe. And adjacent to that is the Snoopy and Gallery and Gift Shop. So there are these buildings, throughout the space. And then tucked beyond the museum, behind a ball field, is Schulz's original studio. And so for the first half of my career there, that's sort of where I worked alongside the creative director there, Paige Braddock, several other cartoonists.
Another brilliant cartoonist.
Yes, yeah. There were sculptors there. There were accountants there. There were all the people who were there to sort of, continue the Schulz legacy and the empire. A lot of it, still headed up by folks like Jeannie Schulz and Schulz's son Craig, who are very much involved in the day-to-day. And so, yeah, I was hired back then as an approvals coordinator. So what that meant was, there's just so much licensed material. Probably your studios are filled with some kind of Snoopy paraphernalia. And the mandate of the Schulz studio is to make sure that that material, whether it's a book or a plush or a T-shirt or a mug, looks as good as it can on that product. We kind of preserve the integrity of the image as it gets translated into other media. And we work alongside the New York office, which formerly was the syndicate that Schulz, United Future Syndicate, which sort of, to do its more media-related stuff, became United Media. And they did all the business deals and found those licensees for us to work with. So we work alongside them. And when they sold or dissolved the company, I guess, would have been in like maybe 2010, a new entity was created called Peanuts Worldwide. And that was done in part by the Schulz family and some other outside investors to sort of continue that business arm, to keep those relationships going with our licensees globally. And the Schulz studio, we continued in basically we're sort of the creative arm, in Schulz's absence, we're there to speak for the strip, to protect the characters, to maintain the integrity of the comic strip, however it manifests, whether it's in a book or as a new animated, Snoopy Show special. Like we're just there at every stage to just, hopefully just do Sparky proud. That's it, So over the years, as during my tenure as an approvals coordinator, I've always had a love of books and of like the original content and of the strip. And so Paige just sort of realized, okay, I think he'd be really good with books. And she sort of put me on books, and and thankfully that's where I've been and existed. And I work in other content related fields, but my main job as editorial director is to just to work with all the different licensees across the world who create Peanuts publications, from, like the little board books that a publisher might put to all, to the next book that maybe comes featuring original Schulz art. And so all those different iterations and permutations, and I get to work with really talented book designers and writers. And sometimes we have in-studio projects. Like for years we did the Peanuts comic books through Boom and the graphic novels, which was a really fun project. So I've just learned so much, and it's been great. And I've gotten to work alongside the museum, in some cases just helping with curatorial stuff or putting some shows together. And I've traveled the world. It's one of those crazy things, because Peanuts is global. We have to sometimes visit places like Japan or Europe and to check in with our licensees. I remember when I first started, Paige said, "Yeah, you work for Peanuts and you see the world," and she wasn't kidding. And it's just been, I can't. It's so weirdly connected to, who I am, I guess, as a cartoonist, because, like I said, I read this eating Cheerios as an 8-year-old. So to be connected to it anyway, and the way that I am is really humbling. And I couldn't ask for a better gig outside of just doing my own work 24/7. It's just been truly life-changing.
It was so great to have Lex as our first guest. It was an honor to have him on here. It really meant a lot to me personally, and I hope you all go out and check his work out, because he's a great guy and a great cartoonist. Peanuts is such a huge worldwide fandom. It can actually be a little bit intimidating to try to do a podcast like this. So it was really great when we ended up becoming friends with William Pepper, our next guest here, who is one of the cornerstones of Peanuts fandom, in that he is the host and creator of It's a Podcast, Charlie Brown, the original Peanuts podcast. William has probably forgotten more about the Peanuts brand than I will ever know. So his podcast is a must listen. If you like ours, you'll definitely like his. So give that a chance. And we were thrilled to have him. So here we are in the time machine going back, and he's given us a little bit of insight on our girl Lucy. September 5th, 1978. Lucy and Charlie Brown are outside at night looking up at the stars. Lucy says, "Do you think you have a lucky star, Charlie Brown?" Charlie Brown says, "I don't know." Lucy says, "I think you do, Charlie Brown." We see one shooting star streak across the sky. Well, fall to Earth, actually. And Lucy says, "And there it went."
This one cracks
Poor
me up
Charlie
too,
Brown.
every time I read it. Poor Charlie Brown. This is a brutal strip. It's Lucy doing what Lucy does, which is crush Charlie Brown, basically.
Right.
I think throughout, not just the strip, but throughout Lucy and Charlie Brown's relationship, I think she does actually have his interests at heart. She's just really can't help herself from putting her thumb down on what she perceives as a weaker person.
Oh, I invite you to contemplate what the Van
Yeah.
Pelt parents must be like.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to hang
Absolutely.
out at Linus and Lucy's. I'll take Charlie Brown's barber dad any day of the week than whatever is going on in that house.
Agreed.
I find that Schulz says that later on in his career, he tried to make the characters less nasty. And this strip is beyond my purview. This is 1978. So I'd never seen this one. But it seems to me Lucy is not trying to put him down. She's just saying he's unlucky.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's true.
I mean,
Lucy feels like she's just speaking truth.
Which makes it all the more brutal in a way.
Right.
She's not just being snide and saying, "Hey, I'm going to point out something that makes you feel bad." I think that's how you are. I mean, it's how it comes across, and in a way, that's even tougher. I'm fascinated by what you're saying, William, about how you think that Lucy ultimately has Charlie Brown's best interest in heart based on who she is. I think that's a really fascinating insight because Lucy, obviously, we get over 17,000 strips. We're going to get all sorts of different aspects of characters, but there is this strange through line that Lucy feels like she knows best. She knows better, not only for herself, but for others. And, she's got the psychiatrist booth and she's, there's a lot and she engages with Charlie Brown so much. And, with Schroeder, she's infatuated, but with Charlie Brown, sometimes he looks like a little bit of a project for her.
Right.
I mean, maybe in some ways, even more so than Linus on a deeper level.
Well, and if you assume that, and I have never thought about it that way, but if you assume that what William's saying is true, that accounts for why she's likable and Patty and Violet aren't.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I like Patty and Violet.
Well, yeah, we like
But Patty and Violet will say things specifically to be
hurt
mean,
him.
to hurt him, whether it's true or not. They'll just express a thought just to crush him a little bit. Lucy is perfectly willing to crush somebody, but she comes at it from the point of view of, here, look, I'm helping you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think she means it, even though clearly she's not.
Yeah, it's like snapping him into reality, or there's a lot of undercurrent there, even if she's like playing a dirty joke on him. But it's almost like Lucy's like, I'm trying to help you get over yourself, is kind of this feeling you sometimes get, this undercurrent, which is really, it's complex. And I think you're right, William. There is something about her that is often unspoken, but it's felt that there is something that is that's redeemable. I don't even say redeemable is the right word. It's just that her way of seeing the world, she's treating Charlie Brown with some sort of form of Lucy respect.
And the psychiatric booth is just the perfect way to show that she wants to help people by basically pointing out their faults.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
Bob, this is really interesting. This is sort of unlocking some stuff about this character for me. This is a really cool conversation. I think that's right. That is the perfect illustration of a person like that. Huh. I love Will and Kevin Hines. I love their podcast, Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About Comics. I love Will's podcast, Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About the Beatles. They were definitely inspirations for us, especially Michael and I, when we were starting this out. So when we reached out and asked them to be guests on the show and they agreed, it was a red letter day for me. If you haven't listened to their podcast, Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About Comics, give it a listen. It's really good. My advice, start right from the beginning, because it started as Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About Spider-Man. and they covered all of the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko issues of Spider-Man, which are my pick for the highlight of the Marvel Age of Comics, as it was called. So it was great having them on the show, and I like to think if I grew up in Connecticut instead of good old PA, we would have been best friends. Here they are.
January 27th, 1964. Lucy is setting up what looks like a slide projector for Charlie Brown. She says, "Okay, turn off the lights." We get a black panel indicating the lights have gone out. And then in panel 3, Lucy begins her slide presentation. Now, this afternoon, Charlie Brown, we're going to be looking at slides which deal with your many personality faults. Some of them are quite shocking. Take this one, for instance. Charlie Brown sees this and yells, "Og!" "Easy, easy," says Lucy. "This is only the beginning."
This is my pick. This was when you guys contacted us and you're like, pick your favorite one. This is the one I thought of. I was like, well, I'm doing the slideshow one.
But yeah.
I don't know how. It's got to be one of the all-time strangest and funniest sequences that Lucy, the child psychiatrist, like literally a child who is a psychiatrist, is showing a visual representation just of faults. Like, what could be on this screen? What could she have captured? And why is he just looking? And then what scares him? Like everything, and that you don't see what it is. It's off screen. It's such a weird concept. His scream of reaction. It's like Clockwork Orange, but Peanut style. Like, sit in the chair. We're going to strap your eyelids open and make you look at the worst aspects of yourself. This whole sequence, I remember being a kid, like being 9 years old, flipping through the little Fawcett paperback and reading it and just like thinking it was so strange and funny. And then walking around in my life being like, what would my slideshow of faults be? Like, what would be on the screen? Everything about it makes me laugh. I think it's so special. I feel like this would be a frequent pick because it's kind of heightened and so bizarre, but I love it.
Will, what's your take on Lucy? We've been having this ongoing conversation with people. I think William Pepper, who does another great Peanuts podcast, he first brought up this idea that Lucy, at the end of the day, she's trying to help. That, you know, she has good intentions for a lot of what she does. What's your take on Lucy when she's doing stuff like this?
Yeah, she thinks she's helping, but she's one of those people where she's just so self-confident and brash that she's a bully. My take on her is that she's real, like that she's something you run into in real life all the time. Mm-hmm. I definitely have friends that are like, "Oh, well, Will, you know, you'd never do something like this." And I feel like saying, "Are you listening to yourself? Like, why are you just punching me in the face? Like, why don't you notice that you're doing that?" So I guess that she just rings true. Kevin, what's your take?
I mean, I think
her?
she's both. And in this moment, is she trying to hurt Charlie or help Charlie Brown? I think she thinks she's trying to help him, but I think sometimes there's strips where she is trying to hurt him. So I think she kind of does both. I think Lucy, there's a good argument that she is the best character to come out of Peanuts.
Oh, yes. She's been my pick for most valuable Peanut on a couple of years because she really does make things go. And I don't know that there was a kind of a character like her before her.
You'd pick Lucy above Snoopy? You're insane.
No, not overall. Just we go year by year.
I think there's an argument for it.
I am insane.
I think Snoopy, there is an argument that Snoopy, as you know, he's obviously huge and the most popular comic strip character of all time. So taking that into account, but there is something that like he fits a type of comic strip character that there are lots of. And Lucy is so much more unique and so much more special. I don't know if I would pick Lucy as the best ever, but I'm like, there's a good argument that she is the most important character. I also am drawn to villains in ensembles, sort of like the villain who's part of the ensemble that you can't get rid of. That like Phil Hartman was on News Radio, where he's like, this guy's the jerk, but he's part of the staff and you don't get rid of him. Or I guess like Shelley Long was kind of that on Cheers. Like when a show is all buddies and friends, it's nice, but there's also something nice about like this one character that's like, oh man, everyone hates this character and that gives them such freedom to do so many things that no one else on the show can do or the strip can do.
Maybe Barney on How I Met Your Mother, like
he's a little bit of a
oblivious
villain,
one.
Yeah, like the characters who have that freedom to go. I mean, Kramer sort of fills that in Seinfeld, though he's not really a villain, but like
he's oblivious.
But like you have characters sometimes that are like bad guys, like, and Lucy sort of is like, she's so mean to Linus and so mean
to Charlie Brown and sort of a pest to Schroeder, but also like if you lost her, you'd lose so much. Right? I think if you lost Snoopy, you'd lose so much too. It's crazy for me to say, but like maybe something else could fill that role. But like Lucy, you would just needed to have Lucy come back to fill it.
You're kind of right. Like Snoopy is sort of like there's Bugs Bunny, like the sort of like. I mean, they're quite different, but like in terms of the roles they fill, you know, the confident, swaggering, physically funny creature who kind of wins all the time. Yeah, there are other instances of that. And Lucy's a bit more, wow, you don't see a lot of strips who need Lucy. Although you can say that about a lot of Peanuts. Like how many have a Linus either? Like
nobody. Yeah.
Well, that's the big four. I mean, most other strips have maybe one or two memorable characters. He's got these four, which is it's the big leagues. They're in every strip. So it's just like different combinations of them set up different kinds of jokes.
I think like if you look at like Bloom County when he came back and did Outland, like Steve Dallas was one of the characters that came back, and that's a weird choice from Bloom County. But I think it's because Steve Dallas was a jerk. And everybody else serves a purpose. Wasn't. And like you didn't need Milo and Binkley as much as you needed Steve Dallas. You need Opus, of course, but you need Steve Dallas for some of these jokes that are in his mind. He's like, well, I need Steve Dallas to do those. And so it's interesting that character sort of survived where lots of the other Bloom County characters did not survive. And Lucy is that to the umpteenth degree.
So, yes, I wanted this podcast to focus on the cartooning, unquestionable. But if you have the chance to talk to Charlie Brown and Lucy, you got to do it, right? And that's what we got to do. We had both Charlie Brown and Lucy, actor and actress Duncan Watson and Melanie Kohn. They came on. They got to talk to us a little bit about what it was like growing up as Peanuts kids and, you know, hearing your voice in feature film animation and on television. They were a delight to talk to, really funny. And here's some highlights from that interview.
September 22nd, 1957. Charlie Brown and Lucy are outside. Charlie Brown looks furious. Lucy is sitting, holding a football, waiting for Charlie Brown to kick it. Charlie Brown says,
"No, absolutely not. You must think I'm crazy. You say you'll hold the ball, but you won't. You'll pull it away and I'll break my neck."
"Why, Charlie Brown, how you talk. I wouldn't think of such a thing. I'm a changed person. Look, isn't this a face you can trust?"
"All right, you hold the ball and I'll come running up and kick it."
Charlie Brown does just that. Unfortunately,
she did it again!
Whump. Charlie Brown lands flat on his back.
"I admire you, Charlie Brown. You have such faith in human nature."
Yay! Well, that made my day. That is so cool. Oh, well, tell us about this one, Duncan. I mean, obviously, this is a classic Peanuts scenario here.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, it's. I mean, obviously, you know, it's one of the most iconic things between Charlie Brown and Lucy, and you know, I mean, you got to give Charlie Brown some credit. I mean, you know, the guy has had how many experiences of football being pulled away, and yet he thinks, well, maybe this time, and you know, so I just love the fact that you know that Charlie Brown is always the guy who will pick himself up, dust himself off, and give it another try.
Yep.
I don't ever want to lose that aspect of, you know, how I view life.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Because, you know, it's thought of, oh, well, Charlie Brown's the loser, but it's partly because Charlie Brown will constantly put himself out there. You know, he's willing to risk failure, which is actually a big secret to life, is being willing to risk failure. I admire that too.
Right. Well, Charlie Brown's the ultimate optimist.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And if Charlie Brown ever got to kick the football, then he wouldn't be Charlie Brown.
Right. Now, here's a question. We had a guest on a few weeks ago, William Pepper, and he hosts a podcast called It's Podcast Charlie Brown. And it's a great podcast. And he was talking about Lucy, he thinks ultimately has Charlie Brown's best interest at heart. That he believes that maybe she's just trying to make him better somehow. What do you guys think about that?
I really don't know about that. I mean, I think that the person who you're talking about probably has more knowledge or has read more strips than I have.
Yeah, but you got to be Lucy, so he's wrong if you disagree. That trumps reading strips.
Okay, well, if my opinion matters, then
Yes.
no.
All right.
No.
No, well, yeah, your opinion matters. All right.
Well, then
sorry, William.
Lucy, she's just a bully.
You know what, though? She's great at it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I would say that, Lucy definitely keeps it real. I mean, yes, I mean, Lucy's unquestionably a bully, but I think that, I think it's a circumstantial thing that, if the chips were down, that you could probably rely on Lucy, but, on the day-to-day basis, she's going to try to get you.
I agree with that with the chips are down, though. Yeah, I think in the right scenario, Lucy's the one you want by your side.
Yeah.
Well, she's definitely a take action kind of girl.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll agree with that.
When we were going to do this podcast, I knew for sure that I wanted to focus exclusively on the comic strip Peanuts, and I wanted it to focus on Schulz as a cartoonist. Because I've been a cartoonist my whole life. I've drawn thousands of comic book pages. One thing I've never done, though, is a daily comic strip. And I wanted someone who really knew what that was like, and someone who had that Schulz sensibility, that sort of philosophical gentleness, but with a wicked sense of humor. And the person that fits that bill is Todd Webb. And he's the cartoonist who created The Poet, which is his daily comic strip. And here he is right now talking to us about what that's like. Hey, so 2020 rolls around. You've been doing graphic novels for a long time, and suddenly you decide, hey, I'm gonna go back to my original dream and do a daily comic strip, right?
I didn't decide it. It was accidental. I refer to The Poet as like my accidental life work, because I think it's like, I hope it's the thing that will stick around longer than all my other work, but I wasn't planning it.
I just want to point out, made the best comics of 2021 list for the Comics Journal.
It did. That took me by surprise.
This is what the Comics Journal had to say about it. A man, a bench, a pigeon, the world. They hang out up the street from Charlie Brown, and in the wake of Thoreau, Bushmiller, and Cage. Those are the three biggies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's high praise.
Congratulations.
Comics Journal. They don't like anything.
Right? Yeah. It's a fickle crowd over there. Yeah. It was an accident for real. So like, I was planning I had done that book, The Continuing Adventures of Catherine Mansfield, where I took the short story author Catherine Mansfield from the 30s. I took some of her diaries and made this little graphic novel about it, where each page was like a self-contained strip, so like a 6-panel strip, and they just kind of accumulated to make this little book. And I liked the way that worked. And so I was going to do another biographical book about a poet that I like named Robert Lax, who lived the second half of his life on the Isle of Patmos and wrote super minimal poetry. And so I was going to do the same kind of thing and take some of his diary writings and letters and things and try to make 1-page strips. And the book was going to be called Robert of Patmos. That was the plan for my next book. And as I started trying to get a handle on how to draw him, I kept simplifying, and I couldn't figure out a way to cartoon him that I liked. And I had been reading, there was like a big anniversary book of Mutts by Patrick McDonnell that came out a couple years ago. And I was like, I've never put one of those big schnoz noses on anybody before. And I added that, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's my guy. Mm-hmm. But while I was developing the book, I had settled on a 4-panel per page format, like a comic strip. And I was like, I'll just do it like in the form of a comic strip where it's just diary entries of this poet. And then I wanted it to be sparse because his poetry was sparse. So I was like, it'll have as small a set piece as possible. He lived in Greece, so and he spent his time at the beach with the fishermen. and there were cats everywhere. So originally there was going to be like a couple of feral cats that he talked to, and maybe a fisherman on the beach. But the beach was too much of a nothing landscape to draw, and there were. I've told Harold this before. There were, in my mind, there were too many comic strips already with cats.
What?
And now Harold. Now Harold's amazing strip, Sweetest Beasts, has a lion, which is different than a regular old cat. So I still feel
nice save,
there. Yeah. But so I didn't want to spend my time trying to come up with a new cartoon cat or several of them, because like I said, it was like a beach of cats running around. So I was like, what about a seagull? And so I changed it to a seagull, but then I was like, but I'm still at the beach, which is nothing. So I was like, well, what if instead of a beach, he's at a park and he sits on a bench and writes, and instead of a seagull, it's a pigeon. And I made those changes, and then I really liked it, but then it had nothing to do with the real guy anymore. And so at that point, I'm just like, all right, so it's not about him. It's just about a poet who talks to this pigeon while he writes poetry in the park. So that's how that started. But it was just going to be a book. And at that point, it was going to be called The Poet, the Pigeon, and the Park Bench. And it was just going to be like an 80-page book. And so I had my format, I had my characters, I had my idea, and I did the first 7 or 8 pages as a mini comic to give away at a show. And when I did that, I shortened the title down to The Poet. And then when the pandemic happened, I was like, I'll just do a page of this book a day until I'm done. So, a couple of weeks, I'll have my next book in the can and I can print it. But what happened was when I started to actually do it every day, it became a comic strip. Mm-hmm. And now it's over 2 years later and I'm getting close to the 1,000 strip mark.
That's amazing. Well, that gives you real insight. I mean, now that you've been doing this for a couple of years, are you able to understand a little bit more of the Schulz method? Are we able to unlock any of those things that only come out of doing a daily strip?
Yeah, it really also has to do with just experience. Like I've been doing comics for over 2 decades now. So I've gotten a little bit better at figuring out how my brain writes. And I think that's the big trick, is like everybody approaches writing differently. And once you can trick your brain into doing stuff, it's easier to figure it out. But also with these characters, I've managed to find the perfect containers for my thoughts, which I think that's the trick to doing a comic strip, is you have to have characters that no matter what idea you want to talk about, you give it to them and they'll put their own spin on it. Mm-hmm. And if you're lucky, there's a laugh at the end. But it's not required.
Big thanks to Todd for coming on the show. If you guys want to follow his work, go over to toddbot.com. That's his home online. You can find out about the Poet comic strip and all his other creative endeavors. He's a musician as well. He has all kinds of very cool pop culture art prints available. So give it a check out. So let's take a little break right now, and we'll come back on the other side.
Hi, everyone. We love it when you write or call to tell us how much you enjoy the show. But don't just tell us. Tell your friends. Tell complete strangers. Share your appreciation in a review. It doesn't have to be on Apple Podcasts. 60% of you listen on other apps. Some of those apps have review sections. Think of all the poor Peanuts fans out there who haven't found us yet. There are review instructions on our website at unpackingpeanuts.com/spread the word. Thank you for your support.
And we're back. So one of the real exciting parts of this whole project is learning new things about something I loved for so long. I had never heard of Stephen Lin, but my good buddy Harold suggested I read his book, A Charlie Brown Religion, and I was blown away by it. Harold, tell us a little bit about Stephen Lin and what we're going to hear.
Yeah, this is an amazing, I guess you'd call it a spiritual biography of Schulz that came out, I'm guessing it was about 10 years ago. And I was blown away by it as well. The most famous biography about him was by David Michaelis. So this book is an interesting counterpart to that, because Schulz's family was very upset. At least a number of them were upset with certain things that Michaelis said in his book. He kind of built this story of Schulz as a kind of a tragic figure, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And the family was, I think, a little taken aback by that. At least publicly, they were surprised when they saw the book, and that, every once in a while, a definitive biography comes out, and then there's nobody who's going to fill that space. So that is the biography that you're going to get. And Michaelis's book is incredibly well researched. He spent a tremendous amount of time, including with the family. So it's a remarkable book to read. You'll learn a lot about Schulz. But if you have read that, or would like something that's maybe a kind of an alternative to see another side of Schulz, Lynn did this amazing book called The Charlie Brown Religion. And he kind of talks about Schulz's faith. And I think he's a pretty clear-eyed picture of Schulz. And I think it's a great way to lay against the other major biography that's been written about him. So if you're interested, Stephen did just a crazy good book, and he also did a crazy good interview with us.
Absolutely. And here's a clip from it now.
So Charles Schulz was a really interesting parental figure related to faith, in that and this comes out in his comic strips in so many ways. Charles Schulz was not somebody who wanted to tell other people what to think or believe.
Right.
That was a through line from the way he led Sunday school, to the way he wrote his strips with so much blank space, to the way he did or just did not talk to his own children about faith stuff. So through a series of life events, his daughter Amy converts to Mormonism, and Charles Schulz did not necessarily agree with all of the tenets of Mormonism. It was not a religious history that he was himself personally on board with, but he also had a really kind of big umbrella approach to faith later in life. And so while he himself was nowhere near converting, he also was a father who loved his kids. I got that sense very strongly that he was a father who just sincerely loved his children. And so he wanted to be a pillar of support in whatever way he could be to his daughter Amy, despite the fact that they disagreed on their theological approaches. What was really then kind of beautiful to see, as I read his letters and heard the stories from Amy and heard the stories from other perspectives from her siblings. There are 5 Schulz kids, and they each told stories of that period of life in ways that really complemented each other. And what was really kind of beautiful to hear was the way that Schulz emphasized in his relationship with his daughter. He emphasized the parts where they did agree. So there was a lot of Charles Schulz's own biblical background that did overlap with Amy's LDS beliefs. And they were reading the same Bible. Amy believed things that Charles Schulz did not believe, and maybe a little bit vice versa. But they had a lot of overlap. I would say that American denominationalism often gets really hung up on the differences. What the Lutherans believe something. I know, right? American anything being divisive.
That's weird. I don't know.
Crazy.
You know what? I disagree, and I don't want you on this show.
Exactly. So, and that's actually something that Schulz poked fun at that about American denominationalism being so divisive, and we hear the comic strip characters making those sorts of denominational jokes. And so Schulz took on this perspective of, okay, sure, we disagree, but we also agree on a lot of things, and that ended up being a really important source of support for Amy as she's on her mission, and was really struggling with it in some ways, as I'm sure most people who go off on a mission of whatever variety, be it a spiritual mission, church-led mission, or just like a moving to a different city sort of experience, it can be challenging. You can want to leave. You can be confused about what your motivations are, or it can just be lonely at times. All the sorts of reasons why people, when they go off to do stuff, have challenges. And Charles Schulz's overlap in faith with Amy became a source of support instead of their differences being a source of division. And I think that's a really kind of beautiful thing.
It was a real thrill to get to talk to Benjamin Clark. Benjamin is the curator at the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center out there in Santa Rosa. And he was a fantastic guest, a two-timer on the show, and his knowledge about Peanuts is great. His understanding and background in museum culture and how that whole world works is fascinating. He's the guy that puts on all the exhibits out at the museum. So we were just beyond happy to have him on the show. And here he is for you from out of the depths of time.
March 14th, 1965. Charlie Brown is standing outside holding what is evidently the string of his kite, which is, of course, scrawled all across the ground and up into the kite-eating tree. In the next panel, he walks along, cleaning up the messy string, and then finally he arrives at the tree saying, "Now look, tree, that's my kite you've got up there, and I want it back." He's now sort of ranting, low-key ranting at the tree. "I paid 79 cents for that kite. You have no right to take it." Now he's full-on ranting. "You can't go grabbing every kite that flies by, you know. Now give it back, do you hear me?" We then have a silent panel. The tree does not respond, and Charlie Brown just sighs, eyes closed. Then he walks away saying, "You can't argue with a kite-eating tree." Now tell us what about that, Major Pickett?
Well, that is the first naming of the kite-eating tree.
Wow.
Whoa.
And this is going in my kite exhibition because actually the Schulz Museum has the original of this strip of this Sunday.
Cool.
And so this will be on exhibit beginning next March, and as part of that exhibition. So it's really cool. When the kite-eating tree's first appearance is in the strip is kind of a matter of debate among fans, because is it the kite? Is it the tree in 1954 or whatever that he snags his kite on? Is it the tree that more eats it, later? It's kind of a thing, but the naming we can pinpoint. It's this is it. So
is the tree drawn consistently?
No.
It's very distinctive, but so it's always different.
So yeah, looking at the kite-eating tree for this exhibition, I realized that kite-eating tree is a type of tree. It's not a specific tree in his neighborhood. It's it's more like a species of tree or something. So, and actually something else with this, we were looking at. So when I'm planning exhibitions and I've kind of got a lot of the stuff, I've got a rough framework and I have most of the art picked out and what we're going to do. I share it with a committee of people, including, Jeannie Schulz and some others to get some feedback. And one of those people is Rosie McDaniel, who's the widow of Mark Kohn, who a lot of old time cartooning folks will know.
Oh yeah, of course.
So Jeannie says they, Rosie and Mark were their social secretaries. They were the ones that would line up all the meetups and stuff with cartoonists because Sparky was just not, social enough to do that. So anyway, Rosie's in these meetings too, and she's a lot of fun. And as we're sitting there looking at this strip blown up on a huge screen in the original, she suddenly almost jumps out of her chair.
I think I know where this is going.
And she says, "Do you see that?" I said, "What?"
Panel
she
2.
Said, look at the throwaway panel up there by next to the title panel. Look at the string on the ground.
Yeah.
It's if you look, it says elm.
Elm, yeah.
Oh, ELM.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
And
I was like, is this our clue from Sparky of what kind of tree this
mind
is?
Blown.
So it's like this little Easter egg. It's like, is it deliberate? It's like it must be.
It's gotta be.
And it's I asked Paige Braddock and Lex over at the studios, like, what do you guys think? Is this for real, like deliberate or what? And they're like, yeah, it must be. It's like, wow.
Because if you were just cartooning a curled string, I think you would continue the curls in the same, right? It would be like a penmanship exercise. But he deliberately reverses the curve coming out of what looks like the L loop.
Yes.
to make that M. It's got to be intentional. That's wild.
So now I'm looking at all the string on the ground, and every string, string on the ground. It's like, did he hide any? Did he do any other, Easter eggs for us? And
that's amazing. And the last panel obviously confirms your theory, because it's not, you can't argue with the kite eating tree. It's, you can't argue with a kite eating tree.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's
wow.
So yeah, and he also, he didn't draw it really consistently either. This tree in particular does, this more or less, this tree shows up quite a lot, but there are some very, very different trees that are also kite eating trees. So.
All right, so the time machine next is going to point to a figure known as Mr. Joel Hodgson. Harold, can you tell us a little bit about this guy? I never heard of him.
So Joel Hodgson is the creator and the original host of Mystery Science Theater 3000, the cult comedy series where a guy and a bunch of robots are forced to watch bad movies, cheesy movies, up in a satellite they've been sent there by mad scientists. It's super creative show. It's super fun. Has a very, very close following by fans. They really, really love this show. And if you love to watch old movies, it's a great way to do it with a lot of laughs. Well, I got to know Joel in 2012, and long story short, I wound up running his company and writing on a number of the new shows that are on Netflix that came out in 2016 and 2017. So Joel's a dear friend and just a genius creatively. And again, to see Peanuts through his eyes was a real treat.
And if you haven't listened to or watched any of the Mystery Science Theater episodes, the new ones, give them a spin. They're real funny, real good stuff. Take it away, Joel.
Well, here comes old Charlie Brown. Good old Charlie Brown. Yes, sir. Good old Charlie Brown. How I hate him.
Hey, woo!
So this one, I think is I have read the book, the biography, the recent biography of Charles Schulz. What was it called?
Schulz and Peanuts.
Yeah, Schulz and Peanuts. And so I do know a little bit about the backstory about this, but it's the first one that comes to mind, and it's just so radical in my mind, and it's so indicative of the kind of like Schultz's thinking. But I'm curious what you guys think about this.
Well, radical is the word for it, I think.
Yeah. How is it radical to you, Joel? I mean, what makes it stand out? Like when you're looking at the newspaper strips, when you were growing up and you see something like this, what is it that makes that so different than everything else?
Well, it's kind of, and again, I think we've talked about this with Peanuts, it's very adult, and the way the kid's ruminating, he's repeating himself, is not like what kids do.
Right.
There's some Schadenfreude in there, I guess, and repeating it and kind of running it in his mouth a few times, right? And then, oh, how I hate him. And so I think that was, again, I feel like so, naive about this because I have this limited understanding of comics, but, I feel like I'm saying this to you and you guys have discussed this probably thoroughly, but they're just, very adult. Like that's adorable. Mm-hmm. Kids who talk like adults, you can't beat it. Right. And that's what he did so well.
And and now everybody can kind of use that, right? The kids talking as adults thing is now just a starting point for everybody, like Calvin and Hobbes or anything else. But at this point, yes. It's hard to even realize how radical this stuff was, I think.
Yes. Yes, and it did something for everyone.
Yeah,
it did something for adults because they could. It's adorable because it's imposing all these sophisticated ideas, and as kids, we felt really bright, like being able to follow along. Yeah. Like it was edifying for kids as well. So you kind of met in the middle, like for. It's very like, it's real crazy when there's something in pop culture that is, I want to use a word that is like, I want to be really, I don't want to say it's edifying, but wholesome. And I mean that in the best way, wholesome being like something a whole person can appreciate and negotiate. So wholesome, it's this thing where parents, it was one of the few things in the world for me that it seemed like everyone approved of. Everyone approved of it. And there's something really, really crazy great about that you don't get in many other things, right?
Yeah, you saying that gives me goosebumps.
Back when I was starting my Amelia Rule series in 2001, there weren't a lot of people you could look around and say, oh, there's kind of an example of something I would like to do. But Mark Crilley was one of those people. His comic book, Akiko on the Planet Smoo, was a fantastic all-ages comic at a time when comics were going through a period of just pretty much unintelligible misery. So when we started Amelia, we reached out and said, hey, Mark, would you maybe give us a little plug or something? And he was kind enough to write the introduction to the first edition of What Makes You Happy, which was an unbelievable thrill for me. And that thrill was equaled by having him as a guest on the show here. He's a great cartoonist. He's a great artist. One of my favorite books by him is called The Drawing Lesson, which is what it sounds like, but it's told as a comic. Brilliantly done. So it was great to have him on the show, and here he is.
And I think Charles Schulz allows us all to forgive ourselves a little for our characters gradually changing over time, because he showed that that's the way it goes, and you're a fool if you don't, gradually alter them and tweak them and get them to the state that you really prefer.
But Mark, do you think it was conscious on Schultz's part to slowly morph their appearances? I don't even know if he noticed it.
Yeah, I don't know if he set about doing it in such a conscious way, but surely he would have seen that it was changing, and he didn't attempt to halt it. Well, in any case, I do think it's helpful for cartoonists who are worried about, consistency and feel embarrassed about, oh boy, my character doesn't look the way I had this character Spuckler that I drew a certain way at the beginning of the Akiko series, and he changed drastically over time. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind was, well, Charles Schulz allowed his characters to change, so this makes me a genius like Charles Schulz.
That's right.
Clearly.
Did you notice that process? Like, was there a moment where it's like, I'm going to change him again? Or were you just noticing that he was changing and you were fine with it?
I think it just happens naturally. Yeah. And in a way, I would almost argue that the characters that don't change at all, that is the, I don't want to say unnatural, but that is exceptional consistency and very impressive to me that a person could continue a strip over the course of years and have those characters not change at least a little.
Although one thing I find strange about that, and I don't know if this is just my prejudice that I'm applying to it. It probably is, but it seems like those strips are also stagnant thematically and in regards to their storytelling and their humor, as well as the art, because I think they're searching for an immaculate consistency.
Can you think of some strips that had that level of consistency?
I don't want to. I'm trying not to slander.
Well, let Mark say it then. He didn't have that theory
Mark,
about
you can slander people.
Ossifying.
Well, I think, and this, let me first say that this does not at all fall into this category of stagnant or anything. But I feel like Jeff Smith, before he got to page 1 of Bone, had been drawing these characters for so long that he had really perfected their look. And then from page 1 to page, 1,000 or more, I think those characters do hold pretty steady from beginning to end.
That is pretty amazing.
And it's beautiful. Yeah.
Our next guest is an acclaimed cartoonist named Ivan Brunetti. Michael, what was it like having Ivan on the show? What's his whole story?
Oh, it was great. He was sort of a legendary figure. Yeah, I used to subscribe to the Comics Journal and read it cover to cover every month. And I distinctly remember an interview with Ivan Brunetti, whose work I hadn't seen. Clearly a very serious, deep thinker on the art of comic strips and comic books. And so it occurred to me that after I saw, there was actually an essay he wrote on Peanuts. And I thought, well, this is the perfect guest, and that'll give me an excuse to track him down and contact him. He's a professor at a university and does write extensively on comics and also teaches a course. And we're very glad to have him on the show and hear all about his exploits.
And here he is.
The ones that I really liked were probably, I would say, like late 50s through the 1960s. When the characters were really fully developed. But I was really intrigued by some of the paperback collections. These were like the small paperbacks that were around at the time. Some of them look really different, and those I realized were the very early ones. Mm-hmm. And I was maybe even more captivated by the drawings in those, although I think as far as reading them goes, the kind of mid-60s Charlie Brown, when he's in the probably in fully depressed mode, kind of captivated me.
That's interesting that you say that the art in those early ones is something that spoke to you even more maybe than the writing did. What was it about the art in those early ones that made you think, oh, this is something special, or this really resonates with me?
Well, in the earlier ones, I think that kind of cartooning was more rooted in a classic kind of traditional style, and that would have immediately appealed to me because I was very familiar with Disney comics, having grown up in Italy. Those were everywhere. So those Disney characters and those comic books would reprint older stories in the newer collections. So I think the proportions in the early strips with the big heads and the tiny bodies, that may be connected to my love of cartooning. I remember going to the library quite a bit and getting any book on animation or a history of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. There were a few books in the mid-70s that kind of celebrated those early Disney cartoons. So I think that looked more familiar, but I love the calligraphy, the way the way he used the pen. It looks so fluid, you know?
Yeah.
But then in the later ones, it's sort of, he really invented his own way of drawing. Like, I don't think anyone really drew like that before. As he got into the sort of maybe the classic era, which I would say from the mid 50s to all through the 60s is, and I'm just saying classic because that's classic for me. Those are the ones that really spoke to me. But I was reading it through, and when I discovered it then in the newspaper, I saw that there were newer strips that were, in the 70s and 80s. So eventually I pieced together the chronology of it, and you could see the drawing changing into something really idiosyncratic and personal. And of course I love that too, but I love all the eras, even toward the end, where he had trouble he had to hold his hand to get the pen to make the marks he wanted. It's still so unique. And I don't know any other cartoonists that push themselves so hard to just keep drawing, even though it was physically painful, and you could almost feel it in the drawing because the hand isn't as confident, but you also feel the work of it.
Yeah, I find those late strips like really deeply moving because he's so far beyond having to prove anything to anyone. He's so far beyond having to need to do it for any kind of financial reason, and he's just doing it because this is who he is and what he loves. I just find it amazing. I feel like almost a gift that he gives us those like last 10 years of the strip when he didn't have to at all.
He didn't have to, exactly. And he could have hired assistants at multiple eras in his career. He could have gotten help to do it. And obviously the strip, it just meant so much to him. It's sort of inseparable from him. And I'm sure he couldn't think of someone else drawing it, or even if he wrote the stories, the jokes or whatever, like that, nobody else could really do it the way he would do it. There's in the the volume of McSweeney's that was a special comics issue. I think it's from 2004, 2005. My friend Chris Ware edited that, and there's some crumpled up little doodles that Schulz did on, it was like yellow legal pad paper, and you thrown them in the garbage, and I think they salvaged them. They're just little pencil sketches, and they're so beautiful. I mean, those are probably some of the last drawings he did on paper.
We would not be able to do this podcast, really. The whole point of the podcast is to read every single Peanut strip in order, and we would not really be able to do that without the complete Peanuts by Fantagraphics Books, where they have reprinted in beautiful editions every single strip from the beginning to the end. And we were lucky enough to have Gary Groth on here. Michael, what about Gary?
Yeah, well, if not for Gary, I probably never would have started publishing comics, because he was the discoverer and publisher of Love and Rockets, which put me on course to at least start getting some work out into the world. So thank him for that, and for the Comics Journal, which, like I mentioned earlier, I read for like 20 years straight. And of course, now with Peanuts, we were able to hear the story of how he got involved in that project, which amazingly enough, he finished. So everybody out there can go read every single Peanuts from Fantagraphics.
But it was my intent, as arrogant as it sounds, because, who am I to do this, but to kind of reinvigorate Peanuts and to introduce Peanuts to the public, because the public had been, the public knows Peanuts mostly from either the TV shows or from merchandising, and, far fewer people actually know the strip than know the merchandise. And I thought that was criminal.
Right.
So one of my crazy ideas was that we would reintroduce Peanuts, the source of all of this, and Schulz's real art to the public in a way that would make an impression.
And it did.
Yeah.
Funny thing is that Sparky was not enthusiastic about the idea.
Okay.
He wasn't hostile to it, but he wasn't enthusiastic. And I finally persuaded him that it was a reasonable idea. His first reaction was, "Oh, nobody cares about the strip enough to buy every, a series of books collecting every strip." And nobody's going to care about this. Nobody's going to be that interested in it. I kept saying, well, no, that's not true. People are going to care about it, and it's worth doing.
Yeah. Well, did you intend to publish a few volumes and then see how it goes, or were you determined to do the whole thing?
It was always my intention to publish every single one. That was my pitch to Sparky. We would publish every single strip in a series of volumes.
It's incredible. Can you talk a little bit about those volumes? I think one of the things that really makes it stand out from all the other Peanuts books is the decision to use Seth as the designer. I mean, I cannot picture a more perfect person to do that. Can you talk about what that process was like, and was the family or the estate or whoever involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Seth was a friend at that point. And I respected him as a cartoonist, and I respected him as something of a scholar of the history of cartooning. And I know we must have talked about Peanuts and Charles Schulz, and I knew he was a huge fan. And I don't remember what I knew of Seth's design skills or inclinations, but it just seemed like a good idea to recruit him to design the books. And now the family didn't know who Seth was.
Right.
So I approached, I think once we got the green light, and this was after Sparky passed, and then I started dealing with Jeannie, who I should also talk about. But Jeannie's the one who really pushed this through. Without her, I'm not sure it would have happened. She was instrumental in making the complete Peanuts happen.
Wow.
That's great to know.
The syndicate was sort of indifferent to the idea.
Really?
And yeah,
with their finger on the pulse as always.
Yeah, exactly. I approached them. Sparky said, drop the syndicate a note and, tell them I'm okay with it. And that's as far as he would go. So I did. And the only response that they gave me was they sent me this envelope that had something like 2 pounds of forms to fill out as a potential licensee. And I remember being so depressed and intimidated by this that I just set it aside. It was, I hate paperwork, and I hate that whole labyrinthine protocol. And it was so corporate that it really demoralized me.
Yeah.
And I kind of set it aside, and I said, okay, I'm going to have to really just, gird myself and fill out all these forms and explain what the project is in detail and blah, blah, blah. And then Sparky unexpectedly died.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about how you tracked down the missing strips. That must have been a real challenge.
Well, it wasn't that much of a challenge. The museum had most of the strips. And then we found a network of collectors.
Right.
And we found, and there was, I think we got some of them from Ohio, from what became the Billy Ireland Museum.
Uh-huh.
So finding the strips was arduous, but not overwhelming.
And I have to say, I think the whole highlight, as far as guests go, even though I've loved every single person that we've had on this show, for me, it was just really magic to have Jeannie Schulz here. And guys, what was it like to you talking to Jeannie and getting her take on her husband?
Well, it was a real treat. I got to meet her with Jimmy when we were at the Eisner Awards in 2006. And she was so gracious and so kind, and I was just immediately taken by her and what she's done for her husband's legacy. She's just a remarkable person. This could have gone a lot of different ways in terms of Schulz and his, how people view him after his death, and what we've done to promote his work and how that happens. Because often it winds up in a corporate hands, and there's not a personal touch to it, and it just becomes a strange thing that's really not what we knew, or they try to recreate it or reinvent it in ways that just don't ring true. That's not the case, and we can largely thank Jeannie Schulz as well as her family for doing that. So to hear her talking about Charles Schulz and Peanuts was a real eye-opener and an insight to me as to why they've done such a good job, and it really does go back to her, Jeannie.
Absolutely. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, well, having her on the show was a real highlight. I mean, we were all a little intimidated, but she was so nice, friendly, and easygoing, very funny. So I think we all relaxed and just had a good time, and I hope she did too.
Absolutely, and here she is.
We've been following the strips that show anger or happiness in a character and counting them every year.
Oh.
And one thing I noticed was the year you got married, 1973, the happiness index went up. In 74, it went up again. 75, it went up again. In 76, it went up again. He was obviously in a very happy place with you when you guys got married, and it's just so lovely to see that in the strip. It's just one way of slicing what is in the strip, but to see that this happiness was coming out in the strip was really special to see.
I'll have to go back and look for that. You guys are amazing. But, he has been criticized that the best period was before that, when he was, I suppose, fighting for his life in a way, fighting for sanity.
Well, listen, in terms of all of that, going back to the hair sitting up on Linus all the way to requited and unrequited romance, I want to read this one that you selected. This is April 22nd, 1983. Linus is standing and he's talking to someone who is sitting on a little footstool with a blanket completely covering them. And Linus says, "Before we continue with your treatment, we need to do something. I'm going to ask you to take the blanket off your head." And then we see the person underneath the blanket says, "Anything you say." and then whips it off in panel 4. And when we see it is actually Sally that Linus is talking to, and she says, "It's me, sweet Babu," which shocks Linus, who yells, "Og!" and his hair is stick straight. And my question is, where does Sweet Babu come from?
Oh, well, you've probably read that I called him my sweet Babu.
I want to hear it from you. You called him my sweet
and
Babu.
he said, I never take anyone's ideas, but he'll take them from you.
Yes.
If you're not giving them, if you're not suggesting them, like my perfect Sunday page.
Yeah.
Right.
all done out in panels.
Was that a surprise to you when it first came up, or did he tell you he put it in, or did you find out later that he put?
It's interesting. I don't remember. I mean, I'm sure he must have told me. Because
well, where did you come up with it from? Did it just something that popped in your head?
It just popped in my head. Yeah.
Is it weird that your phrase for your love is now a catchphrase for the entire planet?
Well, and I don't know how it came out of my mouth.
That's so strange.
Right. We don't know these things. It's such a great phrase, sweet Babu.
Well, and then of course the thing is, she torments him with it.
Yeah.
He's off scene sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With a little arrow saying, "I'm not sweet Babu."
Yeah. Don't call me that. Yeah.
So she loved.
But I'm assuming he didn't say that to you, though.
No, and
I'm assuming that he enjoyed that very much.
Wonder when we're talking about it, when I actually did say, and whether he reacted. I mean, I have no recollection.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because you were just saying a thing. You were just living your life, having a normal day. You didn't realize you were going to be immortalized yet again.
Yeah.
Sparky was prone to grouse about things. And I've found that that's all I do these days is grouse. So I get it. But I called him poor sweet baby once, and he put that in the comic strip. And you probably know when it is. I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah. Now, was that a sincere poor sweet baby then? It wasn't, you weren't pushing back at him. You were genuinely saying to him, poor sweet baby.
Well, I don't think it's ever really totally genuine, is it?
Yeah.
Isn't it always a little bit?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the best.
Oh.
But I noticed that he put in, I made tiles out of some of these for my house, for my new house. And I noticed he put it in when Marcy was trying to go around selling, would it have been Girl Scout cookies? I can't remember. But anyway, they slammed the door in her face and somebody called her poor sweet baby.
Poor sweet baby.
But I will say that someone, maybe I knew how tender he was early on, because I'm not the tenderest, very, very practical. But he told me that someone said to him, "You know, you're adorable." And he said nobody had ever said that to him before.
Aww. There was. What do you think? I had one of the best things about this show, I think, has been doing the interviews. And I wasn't 100% certain I would enjoy that, because it's not something, we've ever trained ourselves to do, be interviewers. But I've loved it. And I think this little collection of our best of really highlights the quality of these guests and just what great people they are.
Yeah. And not to slight the people we didn't feature. Yeah, there's just a lot of good material to choose from.
Absolutely.
And will be again in the future.
Yep. So that's going to do it for this week. We're off next week. And the week after that, we're going to re-release a remastered version of 1950. Lots of people have found the podcast recently. So we thought, hey, let's give them a slightly better version to kick things off with. As always, I'm so happy that you guys have gone on this journey with us. If you have anything you'd like to say to us, you can email us. We're unpackingpeanuts@gmail.com. You could go over to our website, sign up for the Great Peanuts Reread, and get our monthly newsletter. Or you could buy one of our books give us a mud pie. You can support us on Patreon. If you want to keep this conversation going, you can follow us on social media. On Instagram and Threads, we're at Unpack Peanuts. On Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube, we are at Unpacking Peanuts. And we'd love to hear from you. So that's it for this week. Until next time, from Michael, Harold, and Liz, this has been Jimmy saying, be of good cheer.
Yes.
Be of good cheer. Unpacking Peanuts is copyright Jimmy Gownley, Michael Kohn, and Harold Buchholz. Produced and edited by Liz Sumner. Music by Michael Kohn. Additional voiceover by Aziza Shakrala Clark. For more from the show, follow Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Threads. Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube. For more about Jimmy, Michael, and Harold, visit unpackingpeanuts.com. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening.
You know you're adorable.